I've ridden every operating roller coaster manufactured by Rocky Mountain Construction. RMC builds rides all over the world. They're located up in North Idaho and really got their start in 2011 with the new Texas Giant at Six Flags Over Texas. It used their patented iBox track, which allowed them to redo old wooden roller coasters and reinvent them by making them taller, faster, doing different elements, and ever since then they have been a smash hit. As of April 2023, there are 24 operating RMCs. Obviously, new ones are being added every single year, so this is a list that will eventually need an update. And when I look at all of these rides, every single one of them, in my opinion, is at least a 9 out of 10. We're looking at some of the best roller coasters on the planet, which makes this an incredibly hard ranking to do. Even right up until I started making this video, I was moving rides around. Frankly, depending on how a ride is running one day, how recently I've ridden them, where I sit on the train, all are contributing factors to how I rate these roller coasters. My opinion is constantly changing, but after a considerable amount of thought, this is the order I came up with. So at the number 24 spot, we have Jersey Devil at Six Flags Great Adventure. This actually does not use their iBox track, but instead their Raptor track. So you're sitting in a single file line on this one rail, allows you to do tighter elements, takes you through 3 different inversions, multiple airtime hills, and by no means is this a bad ride. None of these are. But I will say I think I was a little underwhelmed after I first experienced this attraction. It has gotten better over time, it's definitely warmed up, but I think in general, the iBox roller coasters are superior than the Raptor track coasters, and I just didn't feel that this one quite had the pacing that some others did. Which means one spot above it, we have Wonder Woman Flight of Courage at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This ride is a near clone of Jersey Devil, it just has a slightly different ending. And believe it or not, that ending I think actually does help this experience. So I definitely did like this more than Jersey Devil. If there was a downside, for some reason this one was a bit shakier than its sister at Great Adventure. I'm not sure the reason for that, but it didn't take away from the ride experience. I still immensely enjoyed this attraction. At number 22, we have Joker at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. This one has always been my least favorite iBox coaster. Ever since I rode it back in 2016, it just didn't really do it for me. It still has a lot of the same elements that you find on other RMCs, such as a 0G stall, barrel roll. The drop is cool the way it twists to the side, but this was RMC's first stab at redoing a GCI roller coaster, and I definitely think they've gotten better with those over time. I know this ride really has its fans, but in the grand scheme of things, this one was definitely a little bit forgettable. For the 21 spot, we have Twisted Cyclone at Six Flags Over Georgia. And this ride is great, it's just very short. Really, I think if it did another lap around, then this would be a different story. This ride would probably be a bit higher. I almost think of this as like an RMC light. You know, it's not super tall, still packs in some fun versions. I like the start of the ride, the wave turn is great. For what it is, it absolutely does pack a punch. It just doesn't stack up to some of these bigger rides. For number 20, we have Medusa Steel Coaster at Six Flags Mexico. And this ride is very cool. It's a redo of a CCI Woody, originally called Medusa. It was a terrain coaster, so I love the way that this ride hugs the ground at times, flies through the woods. It is not necessarily, though, an airtime focused experience, and I tend to lean towards rides that really have like crazy ejector airtime. And this one I felt was more so about bank turns and transitions, which is fine. I mean, it's good that there's a little bit of variety here. You know, you can't go wrong with that barrel roll drop. This was the first one that we saw on an RMC, so still one worth experiencing. And at number 19, we have New Texas Giant. That was the first RMC. They really had a smash hit with their first big attraction. The Texas Giant was an icon, and they reinvented it with some really great moments. I love that first drop. My favorite moment is the airtime hill right before the mid-course brake run. It's a long experience, even though some of those last turns are a little slow. Nothing too crazy, kind of feels like it's gliding around at times, which is fine. Again, when this came out, we'd never seen anything like it. It's a really great coaster and really makes you appreciate all of their newer ones, because when you see how they got started, it really is incredible. For number 18, we have Twisted Colossus at Six Flags Magic Mountain, and oh boy, this ride has dropped so much for me. This used to be one of my favorite RMCs. In my opinion, this ride should be so much better, but because of poor operations and the sheer design flaw with the dueling mechanism, the whole point of this roller coaster being a dueling RMC rarely ever occurs anymore. You are considered lucky if you get a dueling experience on this ride, which is not how it should be. Back when I first rode this, it was less than a year after it opened, and almost every single ride was a complete duel. Both sides, and it was phenomenal. Each side on its own is good, but when you have to go through it alone, knowing that that you should be passing over or under another train. It just leads to more frustration than joy. So for that reason, this ride really just annoys me more than anything. It's one of those coasters that is so close, but just not quite there. They almost had it. At the 17th spot, we have Iron Rattler at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. This was the second ever iBox coaster RMC opened, and this thing is massive, standing 179 feet tall. It features RMC's first inversion. They test out going upside down with a 0G roll, and it is so cool, just the way that it's up on top of that quarry wall. The one downside is if you get a morning ride on Rattler or it's a little colder out, the top section of this ride can be fairly slow. But when it's warmed up, it flies through some of those moments. It's a good time. That drop off the quarry wall is my favorite part, but you know, also that first drop is one of RMC's best, the way it just twists to the side. Goliath at Six Flags Great America is taking our number 16 spot. Like Twisted Cyclone, this one is a short ride, but I think that each element is really well done, so I love what they accomplished with this thing. This is the first topper track RMC to make this list. That technically makes this a wooden coaster. There are only 4 ever built. It was also RMC's first stab at doing a steel truss system, so that just gives it this really iconic, menacing look. And with the first drop of 180 feet, almost vertical, plus RMC's first dive loop and 0G stall, this thing still kicks. It's got great pacing and is a ton of fun to ride. Now we made it to our number 15 spot. This is Stunt Pilot at Silverwood. This is a modified standard Raptor layout. It's got a great panoramic view before you do the first drop. You plunge down to the ground, go through 3 different inversions, flying through this course, something that'll leave you breathless and wanting to get back in line. I also just love the colors of this thing. It just pops in the skyline. It's a second generation Raptor that is almost a near clone of Railblazer that came right before it. I do put this one slightly above Stunt Pilot. I love the rock work that we have here. I almost thought about putting these rides all in one category because of how similar they are. But when I thought about it, the reason I didn't is because I still prefer Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster as my favorite Raptor. So that's taking the 13th spot. Now it has been a couple years since I've ridden this one. I have heard that's gotten kind of rough. So maybe after my next visit, this one will end up dropping a little bit. We'll see. But for some reason, this thing just runs way faster than I think most people expected. And that's why I love it so much. The pacing is just unbelievable. It is so relentless. And each of these elements are just bonkers. And there's nothing quite like being in that single file line. You feel like you're all by yourself just taking these crazy elements. Short ride, but oh so good. So we're officially at our halfway point with the number 12 attraction, Untamed at Walibi Holland. This ride's been given the nickname Mini Steel Vengeance by a lot of people, and I totally understand why. It's currently the RMC that features the most inversions out of any of them at 5. It's got such a great variety of elements. There's so much airtime. That first element after the drop is so quirky and weird. The second half where you're just flying so low to the ground right underneath those larger elements is really cool. This is one I love doing over and over again. The ride I would most similarly compare Untamed to is Twisted Timbers at King's Dominion. I've ridden this more than any other RMC in the world. I know it like the back of my hand. It's got some of RMC's best airtime. Those 3 massive hills you do back to back are just insane. This is another one with the barrel roll drops, such a fun way to start off a ride. If you like getting thrown up out of your seat in some really sudden movements, this is the ride for you. It's just so well done. So now we've made it to our number 10 spot, but before we do that, I just want to take the time to remind you guys that if you like RMC and you want to learn more about how these amazing coasters were brought to life, we actually made a feature-length documentary about Rocky Mountain construction, which is available right now on Vimeo. This Is How We Roll is the story of creator Fred Grubb, his idea for upgrading old wooden roller coasters, and then the practicality of how do we carry that out. It details different challenges they went through and how they overcame them, and gives you a deeper dive into some of your favorite roller coasters from the people that built them. Just head to vimeo.com/ondemand/thisishowwerollmovie, and if you enter the promo code BESTRMC, you'll get 10% off your purchase. Now, let's see which RMCs cracked my top 10. First up is Wicked Cyclone at Six Flags New England, and I love what they did with the layout of this thing. 3 different laps around this structure, so many fast-paced, twisted elements, and just so fluid in its transitions. No dead space at all whatsoever. Towards the end especially, you have so much speed flying into these inversions that are just like tucked away. And you know, on a hot summer day, this thing flies. And much like Twisted Colossus, the ride at our number 9 spot is one that has also fallen quite a bit for me. When it first opened, I said this was probably the best roller coaster in the world, but after some changes, Lightning Rod at Dollywood is just not the same. It's one of the most unreliable rides in the world, meaning there's a very good chance if you show up to Dollywood, you won't even get to ride this thing. But you have to give RMC credit because it is a prototype. They tried something that's never been done before, and that is putting a launch on a wooden coaster. And when it worked, it was crazy. It was so good. The way you just shot up to the top, getting crazy airtime over the dolly. The quad down is still one of my favorite elements in the world, but since then, you don't fly over the top as fast. They replaced some of the wood track with steel iBox track, so it's technically now more of a steel coaster than a wood coaster. And so while I still very much enjoy this attraction, I think when you take all of that into account, that's why it's not as high as it used to be. Number 8, we have Storm Chaser at Kentucky Kingdom. And I feel like I've always liked this RMC a bit more than the average person. I've always thought it was just a phenomenal layout. The trick track double up is so aggressive. I think it was too much for some people. That's why you see that element also on Twisted Timbers, but they stretched it out a bit more because I think they realized it was too much on Storm Chaser. But I've done this thing when it is just unbelievable. One of the best paced roller coasters on the planet. The airtime is actually insane. They absolutely killed it with this transformation. Taking the number 7 spot is RMC's newest roller coaster, Air Force One at Fun Spot Atlanta. This thing is a beast. It's this hugely impressive attraction, such a long experience with a great variety of elements. The inversions on this thing are some of the best on the planet. Flying over the arcade, I love that wave turn you do. Really good stall as well. The one downside with this attraction is that the quad down I think is a bit much. Like that singular element is probably the most aggressive moment on any RMC. It's one of the few times where I'm like, okay, I think that actually it probably would have been better if we didn't go that crazy. It's the only reason that this ride is not higher up for me, but obviously it's still ranked at the number 7 spot out of all of these roller coasters, so clearly everything else is just so good that it makes up for that ending. Just barely missing the top 5 is Outlaw Run at Silver Dollar City. This is another topper track woody, actually RMC's first ride to use topper track. It's a terrain coaster that flies through the woods. This is one of my favorite night rides on the planet because it just gets so dark back there. Night rides on Outlaw Run are otherworldly. I love the first drop on this thing and that ending. Come on. This is the first wooden coaster to go upside down 3 times. It does this double barrel roll finale and it is so crazy. What a cool sensation. Still the only RMC to do something like that. It's one of RMC's older coasters, but man, this thing is still one of the best rides on the planet. Taking the number 5 spot is ZADRA at ENERGYLANDIA. And I think for a lot of people, this is probably their favorite RMC. And I don't blame them. The pacing on this ride is ridiculous. You slam into the brakes with so much speed. It's got what's probably the best stall on the planet. You can just see how drawn out this thing is. It is over 200 feet, so that first drop is just ridiculously tall. The only reason I don't rank this maybe quite as high as I would otherwise is because I would not really call this an airtime coaster, which this is my list. I value airtime a lot, which is interesting because like Twisted Timbers has more airtime than this, but Twisted Timbers does not have the height and the speed that this thing has. It's one of those coasters that at the end you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened. But it's not my favorite RMC in Europe. That goes to Wildfire at Comartin. This is the last RMC topper track that we're going to talk about, and it is my favorite. First of all, it's located in a zoo, which is hilarious. But it's this ridiculously imposing structure. You look at how this was built into the rockwork, this iconic like panoramic turn it does before the first drop, into all these awesome elements. And like some of these others, you're probably noticing a pattern. The rides I rank a lot higher are the ones that just have some of the best pacing on the planet. And Wildfire flies through this course. The use of terrain is one of the reasons why I like this ride so much. And because it's located at a zoo, it almost never has a line, which means you can just ride this thing over and over and over again. You can't do that on some of these other rides. Like our number 3 coaster. Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point is phenomenal, but man, you have to wait a long time to ride this thing because it's so popular. The only reason I place it this high is because the ride experience is just that good. With 5,740 feet of track, Steel Vengeance will leave you breathless because of how many different elements are in this thing, and most of those are airtime hills. Now, it does get a little repetitive at times, but there's no dud moments. Even though it has a mid-course brake run, you don't slow down. The second half is widely considered to be better than the first half. And look how huge some of these elements are. The first half is awesome. I think if you ask most people who've been to Cedar Point, they'll tell you this is one of their favorite roller coasters they've ever done. I don't blame anyone who has this as their number 1, but it's only at the number 3 spot. In second place is HAKUGEL at Nagashima Spyland. HAKUGEL translates to the White Whale. This is a redo of an Intamin wind roller coaster called White Cyclone, and it's one of RMC's largest projects. It stands 180 feet in the air, 3 inversions, also over 5,000 feet long. As sad as it is to say, I think if this ride were located in the US, people would talk about it a lot more. But it makes it one of the top reasons that as an enthusiast you want to visit Japan. If I had to use one word to describe HAKUGEL, it would be aggressive. The airtime on this thing will absolutely give you bruises. Now that is not unique to this ride. I think of rides like ZADRA, Air Force 1, and Storm Chaser that also do the same. But when you factor in unbelievable pacing, a great layout, and picturesque views, this is one of the most memorable roller coasters you can experience. Believe me, I hate that it is so far away, because if it were closer by, I would ride this thing so much more. It's the only RMC in Asia. I really went back and forth with this being my favorite RMC, but I decided to give it to Iron GWAZI at Busch Gardens, Tampa. You know, this is only 1 foot taller than Steel Vengeance, 1 mile per hour faster than Steel Vengeance, 1 degree steeper than Steel Vengeance. But guess what? I don't care about any of those stats. This ride experience is unbelievable. What more can I say about this ride that I haven't already said about all of these other incredible roller coasters? You like pacing, airtime, big drops, wild inversions? Yeah, looking at you, Death Roll. This ride is for you. This roller coaster exceeded my expectations in every single way. It may not be as long as some of these others. I mean, granted, it's still over 4,000 feet long, so it is a long roller coaster. But when you're taking it with that much speed, it just flies through all these different elements. It's a coaster you'll want to do over and over and over again. So there you go, all 24 RMCs ranked. But like I said at the beginning, I'm not really confident in this list. It was like pulling teeth for me to order all these things. If you ask me in a month or two, I probably will have flipped a couple of these around. It really is depending on how I'm feeling. The thing is that so many of these roller coasters have identical or very similar moments. So what happens is we're literally just looking at the combination of elements. And depending on your personal preferences, you might have a totally different list. And that's fine. So many of these rides share similar qualities, but they're good qualities to have. RMC really has found their shtick. They know what works. And that's why we have as many out there as we do. The rides that the enthusiasts will love and that the mass majority people who go to these parks will also be able to enjoy. And that's what makes it great and makes you want to collect them all. So let me know down in the comments below what your favorite RMC is, how do you order the ones that you've ridden, and of course let me know what you thought of this ranking. Be sure to stay tuned for more here at Coaster Studios, and I'll see you next time.